My name is Luna, and the night my parents called to tell me I was dead to them, my mother didn't even cry. No shaking voice, no hesitation, just 7 words, cold and final as a door slamming shut forever. We don't have an older daughter anymore. 5 years. 5 years I spent rebuilding myself from the wreckage of a lie my own sister told. 5 years of silence, of grieving people who were still alive, of pretending that losing your entire family doesn't hollow you out in ways that never fully heal. And then, on a freezing Tuesday night, in the middle of my ER shift, a gurney crashed through those doors. Critical condition, internal bleeding, and when I looked down at that face, my hands went completely still. Because it was Brianna, the sister who destroyed my life, and she was dying. And I, the daughter my parents erased, was the only thing standing between her and death. Before I tell you what happened that night, drop a comment and let me know, what time is it where you are right now? And if nobody has told you today, you are stronger than you think. Now hit subscribe, because this story is just getting started. I need to take you back, because you can't understand that night in the ER without understanding what came before it, without understanding the kind of family I grew up in, and the kind of daughter I was expected to be. I was 31 years old when my parents cut me off. Brianna was 26, and the difference between us, the difference that defined my entire childhood, had nothing to do with how much we loved our parents. It had everything to do with how much they needed us to be different things. I was the responsible one, the oldest, the one who learned early that love in our house was conditional and quiet, earned through good grades, through not causing problems, through making things easier for everyone else. My mother, Diane, was the kind of woman who kept her feelings locked behind a tight smile and a perfectly clean kitchen. My father, Robert, was the kind of man who showed up physically but was never really present, always just slightly checked out, always just slightly on Brianna's side without ever saying it out loud. And Brianna, God, Brianna was the baby, the sensitive one, the one who cried beautifully and always got held, the one whose mess got cleaned up quietly while mine got pointed at. I remember being 14 years old and winning a school award, academic excellence, the only kid in my grade to get it. I came home so proud my chest felt like it would split open. My mother nodded and said, "That's nice, Luna." Then Brianna walked in with a finger painting she made in art class, and my mother put it on the refrigerator. I stood in that kitchen for a long moment after that, just stood there, and something very small and very quiet shifted inside me, the way the ground shifts just slightly before something bigger moves. I didn't cry. I just went to my room and decided, somewhere deep and wordless, that I would never need their approval to feel good about myself. I lied to myself about that for the next 17 years. Because no matter how independent I became, no matter how many things I accomplished quietly and alone, some part of me always came back to that kitchen, always came back to waiting for them to finally see me, to finally choose me. Just once. They never did. The lie happened on a Sunday, a regular, unremarkable Sunday in October, the kind of day that has no right to destroy your life, but does it anyway. My parents had hosted a small family gathering at their house in Columbus, Ohio. Nothing special. Just a late lunch, some cousins, my Aunt Patricia, and of course Brianna, glowing and laughing and completely at home in a way I never quite managed to be, even in the house I grew up in. I remember the afternoon clearly. I was helping my mother in the kitchen, washing dishes while she arranged a fruit plate, and everything felt almost normal, almost warm. I thought, naively, stupidly, that maybe things were shifting. Maybe we were finding some quiet peace as adults that we never had as kids. I even laughed at something she said. A real laugh, and she almost smiled back. Then I left early. I had a double shift the next morning. I was working as a medical assistant back then, still 3 semesters away from finishing my nursing degree, running on 4 hours of sleep most nights. I hugged my mother at the door. She patted my back twice, the way you pat a surface you're checking for dust. I drove home. I made myself a sandwich. I went to bed. 3 days later, my mother called. Her voice was different, not cold exactly, more like she had already finished feeling whatever she needed to feel, and had moved into something harder. Something decided. She said that after I left the gathering, she had gone to her bedroom and noticed that the envelope in her nightstand, the one with $280 in it, money she had been saving for a household repair, was missing. She said Brianna had seen me go into the bedroom earlier that afternoon. I felt the floor tilt. I told her I had gone into the bedroom. I told her the truth. I had gone in to get my cardigan from the chair where I'd left it when I arrived. I was in that room for maybe 45 seconds. I never opened a drawer. I never touched anything on the nightstand. I told her this clearly, calmly, standing in my small apartment kitchen with my hand gripping the counter so hard my knuckles went white. She said, "Brianna saw you, Luna, just that." Like those 4 words were a verdict. Like my sister's word, with no evidence, no investigation, nothing, was more real than my own. I asked to talk to Brianna. My mother said Brianna was too upset to come to the phone. Too upset. The one who told the lie was too upset to be questioned about it. I asked if she truly believed I would steal from her. There was a pause, and that pause broke something in me permanently, because a mother who believed her daughter should not need even a second to answer that question. She said, "I don't know what to believe anymore, Luna." And then my father got on the line. Robert, who had never in my life gone out of his way to defend me, but apparently had no trouble joining this. He said, and I will never forget this as long as I live. He said, "We raised you better than this. Don't call here again until you're ready to own what you did." The line went quiet, and just like that, I was gone. I tried. I want you to know that. Because some people hear a story like this and think, why didn't you fight harder? Why didn't you show up at the door? Why didn't you scream until they listened? And I want to be honest with you, the way I wish someone had been honest with me back then. I tried. Twice. And those 2 attempts cost me more than the silence that came after. The first time was 4 days after that phone call. I drove to their house in Columbus on a Thursday evening after my shift. 45 minutes in traffic, still in my scrubs, hands tight on the steering wheel the entire way. I rehearsed what I would say. I had it all planned. Calm, clear, specific. I would ask them to sit down. I would walk them through every detail of that afternoon. I would ask them, gently, what possible reason I would have to steal $280 from my own mother. I knocked on the door. My father answered. He looked at me for a long moment, not with anger, which I could have handled, but with this flat, exhausted disappointment, like I was a problem he didn't have the energy for. He said, "This isn't a good time, Luna." I said, "Dad, please, 5 minutes." He said, "Your mother is upset." And then he closed the door. Not slammed it, just quietly, firmly closed it, like I was a stranger. Like 29 years of being his daughter had simply been filed away somewhere, and the drawer had been shut. I sat in my car in their driveway for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. I couldn't move. I couldn't cry. I just sat there while the porch light clicked off automatically, like even the house was done with me. The second attempt was a letter. 2 weeks later. 4 pages, handwritten, because I wanted them to feel the weight of it, the paper, the ink, the time it took. I wrote about that Sunday in detail. I wrote about the cardigan. I wrote about what it felt like to be accused without evidence by the people who were supposed to know me better than anyone. I wrote, and this part I mean, that if they truly believed I had taken that money, I needed them to tell me why. What had I ever done in my entire life to make them think I was capable of that? I never got a response, not a call, not a letter back, not even a message through a cousin or my Aunt Patricia telling me to give it time. Just silence. The kind of silence that isn't passive, it's active, chosen, deliberate. The kind that says, "We have made our decision and you are not worth reopening it for." So I stopped, not because I gave up on the truth, but because I finally understood something that took me a long time to accept. You cannot make someone choose you who has already decided you aren't worth choosing. And continuing to knock on a door that keeps closing is not persistence, it's punishment. Self-inflicted and endless. I packed 2 bags. I called my friend Renee, the one person who knew everything, who had sat with me on her apartment floor while I fell apart after that first phone call. And I told her I was leaving Columbus. She didn't try to talk me out of it. She just said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Somewhere I can breathe." I drove to Cincinnati that weekend. And I didn't look back, not once. Cincinnati was quiet in a way Columbus never was for me. Nobody knew my last name there. Nobody knew my mother's tight smile or my father's checked-out silences or my sister's golden, untouchable reputation. I was just Luna, the woman in apartment 4B, who left early for her shifts and came home with tired eyes and always had coffee brewing by 5 in the morning. And for the first time in my adult life, That anonymity felt like oxygen. I finished my nursing degree 14 months after I moved. I remember the day I got my licensure confirmation in the mail. I sat on my kitchen floor with that letter in my hands and cried in a way I hadn't let myself cry in a long time. Not from sadness, from something more complicated than that. Pride, yes, but also grief. Because the first people I wanted to call were my parents. That instinct, that deeply human, completely irrational instinct, hit me so hard I had to press my back against the cabinet and just breathe through it. They didn't deserve that call. They had forfeited the right to that moment. But God, some part of me still wanted to give it to them. I didn't call. I called Renee instead. She screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. And that helped. It really did. I met Garrett 8 months later. He was a paramedic, calm in the way that people who have seen real emergencies are calm, steady in a way that didn't feel performed or forced. He had kind eyes, and he laughed easily. And on our third date, he asked me a question nobody had ever asked me before. He said, "What do you actually need?" Not want, need. And I sat there across from him at that small Italian restaurant on Madison Road, and I genuinely didn't know how to answer. Because nobody had ever made the distinction for me before. In my family, what I needed was never the point. I told him about my parents 6 weeks into dating. All of it. The gathering, the lie, the closed door, the unanswered letter. I watched his face while I talked. He didn't look uncomfortable. He didn't try to offer solutions or suggest I reach out and try again. He just listened. And when I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "They lost something irreplaceable, and they're too proud to know it yet." I didn't say anything back. I just reached across the table and held his hand. And something that had been clenched tight inside my chest for 3 years loosened. Just slightly. Just enough. We got married on a Saturday in April, 2 years after we met. Small ceremony. Renee was my maid of honor. Garrett's sister flew in from Portland. There were 22 people in that room, and every single one of them had chosen to be there. Not out of obligation, not out of blood, but out of genuine love. I stood at that altar and I thought, this is what family actually feels like. Not the obligation and the scorekeeping and the conditional silences. This right here. My parents didn't know I got married. Brianna didn't know either. Somewhere in Columbus they were living their lives, and I was living mine. Separate, parallel. Like two roads that had stopped running alongside each other and gone in completely different directions. I told myself I was at peace with that. Most days, I almost believed it. 5 years. That's how long it had been when that Tuesday night happened. 5 years, 2 months, and, if I'm being completely honest, 11 days. I know that because I had stopped counting somewhere around year 3, and then suddenly found myself counting again, without meaning to. The way you do when something is almost healed, but not quite. When the scar tissue is there, but the skin is still thin underneath. I was working the night shift at Mercy General. 3rd year on the floor, ER nursing. I had grown to love the night shift in a strange way. There's a particular kind of focus that comes at 2 a.m. in an emergency room, a sharpness that burns away everything unnecessary. You can't bring your baggage onto that floor. The moment those doors open and a patient comes in, you are nothing but your training and your hands and your ability to stay present. For someone like me, someone who had spent years learning to compartmentalize pain, the night shift felt almost like relief. It was a slow night at first. A fractured wrist. A child with a high fever whose young mother was more frightened than the situation required. I held her hand for a moment while the attending examined her son and told her he was going to be okay. An elderly man with chest tightening that turned out to be severe anxiety, not cardiac. I got him a warm blanket and sat with him for 4 minutes while his heart rate came down. These are the moments nobody tells you about when you think about ER nursing, the quiet human ones between the emergencies. Then at 2:17 a.m., the radio crackled. Paramedics incoming, female, late 20s, motor vehicle accident, internal bleeding suspected, BP dropping, ETA 4 minutes. I moved into position with the rest of the team. This is automatic for me now, the way my body shifts into a different gear when a critical case is coming in. My mind clears, my hands steady. I stop being Luna who carries things and become Luna who handles things. It's the one transformation in my life I'm genuinely proud of. The gurney crashed through the ambulance bay doors at 2:21 a.m. The paramedics were moving fast, rattling off vitals, BP 84/50, pulse thready, unresponsive to verbal. I stepped forward to assist with the transfer, and I looked down at the patient's face to do my initial visual assessment. And the world tilted. It was a sensation I can only describe as every single thing inside me lurching sideways at once. Like the floor had moved, but my body hadn't caught up yet. Because the face on that gurney, pale as paper and slack with unconsciousness, framed by dark hair matted at the temple with dried blood, was Brianna's. My sister. My sister who had stood in my parents' house 5 years ago and told a lie so clean and so cruel it had cut me completely out of my own family. My sister who had never called, never written, never once, in 5 years, tried to reach me to say she was sorry. That face, right there, in my ER, on my shift. I had exactly 3 seconds to feel it. The shock, the disbelief, the white-hot flash of something I didn't have a name for yet. 3 seconds. And then my training took over completely. "Let's move," I said. And we moved. The next 40 minutes were the longest of my life. Not because I didn't know what to do. I knew exactly what to do. Every movement was precise. Every call was correct. Every decision was made cleanly and without hesitation. My hands never shook. My voice never cracked. From the outside, I was exactly what I was trained to be. A skilled ER nurse managing a critical trauma case with complete professionalism. But inside was a different story entirely. Because while one part of my brain was tracking Brianna's BP, monitoring her oxygen saturation, communicating with Dr. Okafor, our attending that night, calm and methodical and exactly the kind of doctor you want in a room when things are serious, another part of my brain was doing something I couldn't stop. It was pulling up images, flashes. My mother's voice on the phone saying we don't have an older daughter anymore. My father's face in the doorway, the porch light clicking off, 4 pages of handwritten truth that nobody ever read. I pushed it down. I pushed it so far down it was almost not there. Almost. Brianna's spleen was lacerated. Dr. Okafor made the call for emergency surgery within the first 20 minutes. While the surgical team was being assembled, I was monitoring her vitals, adjusting her IV line, doing everything that needed doing. At one point she stirred, not fully conscious, just that restless semi-awareness that sometimes happens before surgery, when the body is fighting hard and the mind is half surfacing. She moved her head slightly and made a sound. And then, in this thin, barely there voice, the voice of someone speaking from the bottom of a deep well, she said a name. Not mine. She said, "Kayla. Tell Kayla I didn't mean it." I went completely still for just a moment. Kayla? I didn't know anyone named Kayla in connection with Brianna. But the way she said it, I didn't mean it. With this raw, almost childlike desperation, like even in semi-consciousness the guilt was sitting right there on the surface, pressing out. It lodged in my chest like a splinter. Small but impossible to ignore. The surgical team came. They took her. And suddenly the room was quieter, and I was standing there with the controlled chaos of the last 40 minutes settling around me like dust after a storm. I had exactly 90 seconds to myself before the waiting room doors opened. My mother walked in first. Diane, 61 years old now, smaller than I remembered somehow, wearing a gray coat I didn't recognize, her hair shorter. Behind her, my father Robert, heavier, slower, his face carved with something that looked like genuine fear. They were scanning the room frantically, the way people do when they're terrified and looking for someone to tell them everything is going to be okay. My mother's eyes found me, and the look on her face, I have replayed it 100 times since that night. It wasn't just shock at seeing me. It was something layered and complicated and almost painful to witness. Shock, yes, but underneath it, shame. Raw, unmistakable shame. The kind that doesn't need words because it lives in the way someone's eyes drop and then come back up and then don't quite know where to land. She took one step toward me. And then she said my name. Just that. Just Luna. Like she was checking if I was still real. I stood there and let her say my name. I didn't move toward her. I didn't move away. I just stood in the middle of that ER corridor in my scrubs with a pen still in my hand, and I let the moment be exactly what it was. Uncomfortable and overdue and 5 years too late. My father hung back slightly. Robert, who had told me not to call again until I was ready to own what I did, was now standing in my emergency room at 2 a.m. unable to meet my eyes. He was looking at the floor, then the wall, then somewhere just past my left shoulder, everywhere except directly at me. And I noticed that. I filed it away quietly the way I file things, not with anger, just with clarity. My mother took another step. Her hands came up slightly, like she wanted to reach for me but wasn't sure she had the right. She said, They won't tell us anything out there. Nobody will tell us anything. Is Brianna? Her voice broke on the last word, just fractured completely. And I watched her press her hand against her mouth to hold the rest of it in. And here is the thing I need you to understand. The thing I am not ashamed of, even though some people might think I should be. In that moment, I felt something for my mother. Not the warm, flooding forgiveness you see in movies. Nothing like that. But something human and unavoidable. Because she was a mother terrified for her child. And I knew what that kind of fear looked like. I saw it every single night in my work. It doesn't care about history. It doesn't care about who was right or wrong. It just exists, raw and animal and desperate. So I told her the truth professionally and clearly. I told her Brianna had been taken into emergency surgery for a lacerated spleen, that the surgical team was experienced and skilled, that her vitals had been stabilizing before she went in, that someone would update them as soon as there was information to give. I said it the way I would say it to any family member in that waiting room. Steady, measured, compassionate without being personal. My mother grabbed my arm, not gently. She grabbed it the way drowning people grab things, with her whole hand, urgent and desperate. She said, Luna, please, I need you to tell me she's going to be okay. I need to hear it from you. And I looked down at her hand on my arm. And I looked up at her face, and I said, very quietly, I can't promise outcomes, Mom. Nobody can. But I can tell you that she is getting the best possible care. I paused, just for a breath. And then I said, she always has. I watched those last 3 words land. I watched my mother's face change, a small, almost imperceptible crumbling around the edges, like something structural had shifted. My father made a sound, not quite a word, just a sound, and turned slightly away. And I gently removed her hand from my arm, took 1 step back, and said, I need you both to wait in the family room. I'll make sure you're updated. Then I turned around, and I walked back to my station. And I finished my shift. Brianna made it through surgery. I found out at 4:43 a.m. when Dr. Okafor came out of the OR, and I was standing at the nurse's station updating patient charts. He said she was stable, recovering, that the surgical team had done clean work. I nodded and wrote it in the log and kept my face exactly neutral. My colleague Darnell, who was working alongside me that night, glanced over once. He knew something was different about this case, could probably feel the particular stillness I had been carrying for the last 2 hours, but he didn't ask. Good nurses know when not to ask. I finished my shift at 6 a.m. I changed out of my scrubs in the locker room, moving slowly, the way you move when your body is exhausted but your mind is still running at full speed. I sat on the bench in front of my locker for a long moment with my jacket in my lap, and I just breathed, in and out. The way Garrett had taught me during a particularly hard stretch 2 years ago, just breathe like it's the only job you have right now. Just breathe. Then I drove home through a Cincinnati morning that was just beginning to go gray and pink at the edges. The streets were nearly empty. A bakery on the corner had its lights on already, warm yellow squares of light in the cold dark. I watched it pass and thought, life is so strange, so completely and utterly strange. 12 hours ago I was making dinner with Garrett and complaining that we were out of coffee. And then the universe just does that. Garrett was awake when I got home. He always wakes up when I come in from a night shift, even when I tell him not to. He was in the kitchen in his old gray sweatshirt, coffee already made, and he took 1 look at my face and said nothing, just opened his arms. And I walked into them and pressed my face against his shoulder, and for the first time since 2:21 a.m., since the moment I looked down at that gurney, I let myself feel it. All of it. The shock and the grief and the strange twisted ache of seeing your mother's face after 5 years and finding that it still does something to you no matter how much work you've done on yourself. I cried, not pretty crying. The real kind, the kind that comes from somewhere so deep it almost hurts on the way out. Garrett held me and didn't say a single word until I was done. And then he just said, I've got you. That's all. And it was exactly enough. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived. Handwritten. My mother's handwriting on the envelope. I recognized it immediately, That particular slant she'd always had, slightly leftward like she was always bracing against something. I stood at the mailbox for a full minute before I brought it inside. I sat at the kitchen table and I opened it carefully, like it might break. She filled 4 pages of words that were long overdue, apologies layered over explanations layered over more apologies. She wrote that Brianna had confessed everything 2 days after being discharged, that the money had never been stolen, Diane had simply miscounted and misremembered, that Brianna, panicking and already defensive about something else that afternoon, had deflected instantly and pointed at me, that she had watched the lie land and said nothing. For 5 years, nothing. My mother wrote that she was sorry, over and over, in different words, with what felt like genuine anguish bleeding through every line. She wrote that she had failed me, that she had chosen wrong, that not a day had passed in 5 years where she hadn't thought about the look on my face the night she called. She didn't ask me to come home. She didn't ask for reconciliation on any timeline. She just said, "I needed you to know that I know. And I am sorry, Luna. I am so deeply sorry." I read it once, all 4 pages, slowly, at my kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that went cold before I finished. Then I folded it carefully back along its creases, and I put it in the drawer of my bedside table. Not in the trash, not framed on a wall, just held. Somewhere safe and private and mine. I didn't call her back that day, or the next. I took the time I needed because for the first time in my life I understood clearly that I was allowed to do that, to take the time I needed without explanation or apology. That is not coldness. That is not cruelty. That is simply a woman who learned, the very hard way, that her own healing has to come first. What I did do that evening was call Renee. We talked for 2 hours. We laughed at parts of it, the absurd, painful, almost cinematic quality of the whole thing. Brianna wheeled into my emergency room, my mother grabbing my arm under fluorescent lights. 5 years collapsed into one freezing Tuesday night. Renee said, "Luna, if you wrote this down, nobody would believe it." And I said, "I know," and we laughed again, and it felt clean. I am not the same woman who drove out of Columbus 5 years ago with 2 bags and a broken heart. I am steadier now, more certain of what I will and won't accept, more honest about what I feel without performing strength I don't have. I built something real, a career, a marriage, a life that belongs entirely to me. Nobody gave it to me. Nobody's approval made it possible. And that night in the ER, when my hands were steady and my voice was calm and I did my job with everything I had for the sister who had taken everything from me, I proved something to myself that no letter and no apology could ever give me. I proved that what they did not make me like them. That I could be tested in the most personal, most impossible way, and still show up. Still be the person I chose to be. That is mine. That will always be mine. And honestly, that is enough.